Sophie Carter clutched her 6-month-old daughter Ella tighter as she made her way down the narrow airplane aisle. Her worn-out diaper bag threatened to split at the seams with every step. The late-night flight from Chicago to San Francisco was packed with business travelers, and she could feel their judgmental stares. Her faded restaurant uniform and frayed jeans stood out among the designer suits and sleek laptops. "Please, Ella, be good for Mommy," she whispered, pressing a soft kiss to her daughter's forehead. The baby remained peaceful, her tiny fingers curled around Sophie's necklace, a simple brass locket containing the only photo she had of Nathan Brooks, Ella's father, the man who had walked away the moment Sophie told him she was pregnant. This flight represented everything Sophie had sacrificed. For months, she skipped meals, worked double shifts, and saved every penny just to afford these tickets. Ahead lay a job at her aunt's restaurant, a chance at a fresh start, a stable life for Ella. As she struggled to push her bag into the overhead compartment, a deep voice beside her offered, "Let me help you with that." Sophie turned, coming face to face with a man in his mid-30s. His expertly tailored suit spoke of wealth, but his green eyes held a kindness that caught her off guard. Sophie hesitated for a moment, but then nodded, stepping aside as the stranger effortlessly lifted her overstuffed bag into the overhead compartment. He did it with ease, as if helping others came naturally to him. "Thank you," she murmured, adjusting Ella in her arms before settling into her seat. The man took his window seat beside her. Sophie couldn't help but notice his polished appearance, the expertly tailored suit, the expensive watch that glinted under the cabin lights. But what caught her attention the most was the wedding ring on his left hand. "I'm Luke," he introduced himself, his voice warm and steady. "Sophie," she replied, still feeling a bit awkward. The plane's engines roared to life, and as it began its ascent, Sophie instinctively held Ella tighter, silently praying she wouldn't wake up. But as the cabin pressure shifted, Ella's tiny face scrunched up. A second later, a sharp, desperate wail filled the air. Sophie fumbled for the pacifier, trying to soothe her, but it didn't work. She felt the weight of judgmental stares around her. A businessman in front of them sighed and put on his noise-canceling headphones, while a middle-aged woman across the aisle muttered something to her seatmate, her disapproving gaze flickering toward Sophie. "Please, baby, calm down," Sophie whispered, rocking Ella gently, but her daughter's cries only grew louder. She rummaged through her bag, searching for the bottle she had carefully prepared, only to realize with horror that she had spilled the formula earlier when rearranging her things. Everything felt like it was falling apart. "Would you like me to try?" Luke's deep voice cut through the chaos, gentle but certain. Sophie blinked at him, stunned. "You?" He simply nodded. Before she could respond, he began to hum. At first, Sophie didn't recognize the tune, but within moments, Ella's cries began to soften. Her tiny hiccups slowed, and she turned wide, curious eyes toward the stranger, completely captivated by the soothing melody. Sophie stared in disbelief. "How did you do that?" she asked quietly. A flicker of something unreadable crossed Luke's face before he smiled faintly. "My daughter used to cry the same way." Sophie studied Luke carefully. His voice was calm, but there was a deep sadness behind it. Her eyes flickered to the wedding ring on his finger, gleaming under the cabin lights. "You have a daughter?" she asked softly. Luke nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the window. "Mia. She would have turned 4 this March." Sophie felt the weight of his words. She didn't want to pry, but Luke seemed to sense her curiosity. He took a slow, measured breath before continuing. 3 years ago, on a rainy night, my wife, Emily, was driving Mia home from her grandmother's house. They were less than 10 minutes away." He absentmindedly turned his wedding ring, a subconscious habit. "A drunk driver ran a red light." His voice faltered. "They didn't make it." Sophie's chest tightened. "I'm so sorry, Luke." He nodded, a faint smile flickering across his lips but never quite reaching his eyes. "Thank you. I've spent the past 3 years trying to figure out how to keep going." Sophie held Ella closer, feeling the raw pain behind Luke's words. "What about you?" Luke asked gently. "Ella's father?" Sophie's fingers instinctively brushed against the locket hanging from her neck. She had never spoken about Nathan to anyone, but something about Luke made her feel safe. "Nathan wasn't ready to be a father," she said, keeping her voice even. "The moment I told him I was pregnant, he said it was my problem to deal with. Then he left. Abandon you both." Luke's voice was firm without hesitation. "That's his loss." Sophie pressed her lips together. A part of her had once blamed herself, wondered if she had done something wrong to make Nathan leave. But hearing Luke say it so plainly, without judgment, made her feel seen in a way she hadn't before. "Sometimes I think, maybe it's better this way," she admitted. "At least Ella won't have to grow up with a father who never wanted her." Luke studied her, his green eyes both gentle and contemplative. "You're doing an amazing job, Sophie. I can see it in how she looks at you, in how safe she feels with you." The unexpected praise warmed something inside her. They continued talking, sharing memories, losses, and unspoken hopes. And for the first time in a long time, Sophie felt like she wasn't alone. Sophie stood up, gently adjusting Ella in her arms as the baby stirred. "I need to change her diaper real quick." Luke nodded, watching as she made her way toward the cramped airplane restroom. The moment the door clicked shut, he let out a quiet sigh and opened his briefcase. Inside was a thick envelope, Sophie Carter printed neatly on the front. His fingers traced the edge of the envelope, hesitating. He had planned to tell her from the start, to hand her this letter the moment they landed. But now, after everything they had shared, after the unspoken understanding between them, the stories of loss and pain, he found that he couldn't. Because the truth inside this envelope would change everything. Nathan Brooks, the man Sophie believed had abandoned her without a second thought, had died in a motorcycle accident 1 month ago. Before his death, he had hired a private investigator to track down Sophie and Ella. According to the documents Luke held, Nathan had regretted everything. He had planned to make things right, to support his daughter, but he never got the chance. Now his estate, a fortune amassed through tech investments, belonged entirely to Ella. Luke tightened his grip on the envelope, his chest heavy. He was the executor of Nathan's estate, the one responsible for handling the inheritance. But in this moment, he wasn't just a lawyer delivering legal news. He was someone who had begun to care about the woman sitting beside him. Sophie returned to her seat, adjusting Ella in her arms. "She's been so good, thankfully no more fussing." She smiled, but it faltered as she noticed the tension in Luke's expression. "Are you okay?" she asked, brows furrowing. Luke slid the envelope back into his briefcase and forced a small smile. "Yeah, just lost in thought." He knew he couldn't keep this secret for long, but he also knew, once he told her, nothing between them would ever be the same. The plane began its descent, the captain's voice echoing over the speakers, announcing their approach to San Francisco. Sophie adjusted her bag, ready to step off the plane, but when she glanced at Luke, she saw it. The hesitation, the conflict in his eyes. He was holding something back. "Sophie," Luke took a deep breath. "There's something you need to know." She frowned as he reached into his briefcase, pulling out a thick envelope with her name on it. "Nathan Brooks passed away last month." Sophie froze. For a moment, she wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. "What are you saying?" Luke met her gaze, steady but apologetic. "Nathan was in a motorcycle accident. He didn't survive." It felt like the air had been sucked out of her lungs. The name she had tried so hard to erase from her life was suddenly right in front of her again, suffocating her. "And why do you have this information?" Her voice turned sharp, defensive. Luke tightened his grip on the envelope. "Because I'm the attorney handling Nathan's estate." Sophie went completely still. "You? What?" "I knew about you before we met," Luke admitted. "Before Nathan died, he hired a private investigator to find you and Ella. He regretted everything, Sophie. He wanted to fix his mistakes." Sophie let out a laugh. "Sharp, bitter. Regretted?" She shook her head. "He had every chance to help me, but he didn't. He left me struggling, left his daughter without a father while he lived his life without a care in the world." Luke didn't argue. He knew she had every right to be angry. "I know," he said softly. "I'm not here to defend him. I'm here because you need to know Nathan left everything to Ella. Sophie felt the world shift beneath her. What? Nathan's entire estate now belongs to Ella, Luke explained. His apartment, his bank accounts, his shares in the company, everything. According to his will, you are her legal guardian and have full control over it. Sophie had no words. A part of her wanted to throw the envelope away, to scream that she wanted nothing from Nathan. But another part of her, the part that was exhausted from barely making ends meet, felt something heavy settle in her chest. Sophie stared at the envelope in Luke's hands, her breath coming faster. You're telling me that the man who abandoned us has now left everything to Ella? Luke nodded, his expression filled with understanding. I know this is a lot to take in, but Sophie, this isn't about Nathan anymore. This is about Ella, about her future. Conflicting emotions crashed over her like a tidal wave. A part of her wanted to reject it all, to prove that she could raise her daughter without Nathan or anything he left behind. But another part of her thought about the sleepless nights, the endless worry over affording formula, the constant struggle to make ends meet. You don't have to decide right now, Luke said gently. Read the documents, think it over, but don't let your anger toward Nathan stop you from doing what's best for Ella. Sophie looked up at Luke, her heart heavy. Why do you care? She asked. Luke took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. Because I know what loss feels like, Sophie, and I don't want you to have to choose between pride and what's best for your daughter. A long silence settled between them as the plane touched down, both of them knowing that Sophie's life had just changed forever. Passengers began filing out of the plane, but Sophie remained seated, the envelope in her hands feeling heavier than it should. She had dreamed of a fresh start, but not like this. Luke stood, reaching up to grab her bag from the overhead compartment. When he handed it to her, their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. You can hate Nathan forever if you want, Luke said, his voice steady. But don't let that stop you from giving Ella a better life. Sophie swallowed hard, then slowly nodded. I need time to think. Luke gave her a small smile. I understand. If you need anything, my number is in the paperwork. She glanced down at Ella, who looked up at her, tiny fingers reaching for Luke's tie, just as she had throughout the flight. A part of Sophie knew that Luke wasn't just the messenger. He had become something more. Ella needs dinner, she murmured, then met his gaze, and I could use someone to talk to. Luke smiled, warmth flickering in his green eyes. I know a great Italian place on Columbus Avenue. And as they walked out of the airport together, Sophie didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hope. That night, under the warm glow of the Italian restaurant's lights, Sophie laughed more than she had in the past year. Luke made her feel safe, and more importantly, he made her believe she wasn't alone anymore. In the weeks that followed, he stayed in touch, helping her navigate the complexities of Nathan's estate. But what Sophie hadn't expected was Luke's next decision. He requested a transfer to San Francisco. Are you sure? Sophie had asked when he told her. I've never been more sure. Luke smiled, his green eyes full of certainty. I don't want to be just the guy who helps you sign paperwork and disappears. As time passed, Luke became an irreplaceable part of their lives. He was there to help Sophie with Ella, carrying her when Sophie was too exhausted, reading bedtime stories every night. And little by little, Ella started calling him Daddy. 4 years later, on a sunny afternoon in the park where Ella loved to play, Luke knelt before Sophie, holding a sparkling ring in his hand. Sophie Carter, you walked into my life on a fateful flight. You and Ella gave me something I thought I'd never have again, a family. I don't want to just be the man who helps. I want to be your husband, Ella's father, forever. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down Sophie's face, but this time they were tears of joy. She glanced at Ella, who was bouncing up and down in excitement, then back at the man before her. Yes, Luke, I'll marry you. As Luke slipped the ring onto her finger, Ella squealed and threw her arms around both of them. And in that moment, Sophie knew she had finally found her real family. The city of San Francisco glowed under the golden hues of sunset. But to Sophie, the most beautiful sight wasn't the skyline. It was the man standing at the altar, waiting for her. Luke, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, his green eyes filled with love, stood still as she walked toward him. Ella, in a tiny white dress, held a basket of petals, tossing them with enthusiasm. As soon as she saw Sophie, she squealed in excitement. "Mommy, you look so pretty. Daddy, look at Mommy." The room filled with laughter at her innocent joy. Sophie chuckled, but when her eyes met Luke's, her heart stilled. This moment, it was something she once thought she would never have. When the officiant spoke, "Luke Harrison, do you vow to love and protect Sophie Carter for all your days?" Luke didn't hesitate, gripping Sophie's hands tighter. "Absolutely." Then it was Sophie's turn. She glanced at Ella, who was gripping Luke's hand, her little face glowing with happiness. "Do you, Mommy?" Ella whispered. Tears filled Sophie's eyes as she smiled. "Yes, I do." As Luke kissed her, surrounded by cheers and applause, Sophie knew she had finally found her real family. Married life for Sophie and Luke wasn't about extravagant luxuries. It was about quiet, simple moments filled with love. Every morning, Luke woke up early to make breakfast, a habit he had kept since they first moved in together. Sophie often teased him, "You're a lawyer, why don't we just hire a chef?" But Luke would only smile, placing a plate of pancakes in front of her. "Because I like taking care of my family myself." Ella, now 8 years old, had long since stopped calling him Luke. Now she only ever used one word: Daddy. "Daddy, can you pick me up from school?" "Daddy, can we have pizza tonight?" "Daddy, tell me a story about Mommy when she was little." And every time Sophie would look at Luke with gratitude, knowing he didn't just love her, he loved Ella as if she were his own. Weekends were filled with family adventures, a trip to the beach, a picnic in the park, or simply cooking together and watching movies at home. These were moments Sophie never imagined she would have. One evening, as Sophie and Luke cleaned up after dinner, she turned to him with a soft smile. "Thank you for being here," she whispered. Luke frowned. "I'll always be here, Sophie." She shook her head, stepping closer, placing her hand over his heart. "Not just here. I mean, thank you for choosing me and Ella, for loving her, for making us a family." Luke pulled her into his arms, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I didn't choose you, Sophie. I just belong with you." And in his embrace, Sophie knew she had finally found her forever home.